Hi, and welcome back to the WHVP podcast. In this week's podcast, the WHVP team sits down and discusses generational wealth and corporate family governance. The tax information and investment information in this podcast should not be taken or used as advice for investment or tax purpose planning decisions. Before we discuss these topics, we're going to talk about how the Swiss national team performed in the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Let's get into it. The Olympics just concluded. The United States were the winners. I'm just going to put it out there. I had a big argument with someone about how there can't be any winner of the Olympics. I said, well, why did they have a medal count then? But what was actually really impressive, and I enjoyed watching, was watching the Swiss team compete.
Yes.
Because they competed really well as far as their performance for the Summer Olympics. They've almost never had such a successful Olympic run. I think one time before.
Yeah, they did very well overall. I think, what are we, like on 20th place or something?
Yeah, overall 20th place.
I think considering how small we are,
medals.
30 medals, yeah, considering how small we are, I think it's a decent performance.
That's a very good performance.
Yes, definitely. The last time we had so many medals was in 1952, where Switzerland got 14 medals.
Yeah.
So I think they did a good job, and especially the mountain biking team, where we have, or the women, where we had place 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. So that's really great. And if you look at the picture they took, have you recognized? There is they all have on clothes.
Yeah. They are the sponsors.
The sponsors.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll see if they make a run in the clothing and the apparel market as well.
Oh yeah, I think they did, because I already have friends who bought the Olympic edition of the clothes.
Yeah.
But they're nice. I think they're very pretty. Yeah. And all 3 gold medals were won by women.
Yes.
Yeah. Swiss women coming in strong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the last time the Swiss Olympic team won gold, silver, and bronze was in the early 40s or 50s.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
And they won it in gymnastics, artistic gymnastics.
Okay.
Yeah. They're really good at doing handstands.
Well, that's a very serious sport. That is a very tough sport to do.
Oh yeah. And especially when you go and watch the historic film of like the gymnastics they used to do, is really, really interesting to watch.
Yeah.
Definitely not what they do today, but cool. Still took a lot of strength. Yeah. No, it was I really enjoyed it. I think for me, I'm really big into watching triathlons, and the Switzerland has had a female triathlete that has dominated for the past, I don't know, decade and a half, 2 decades.
Sure, yeah.
And she's still in her 40s, placed in the top 6.
Yeah, and she just had a child
not
too long ago. Yeah, she's very impressive. And also with the female marathon runners, because that's my favorite sport to watch. We had one performance which was very good. I think she was 12, I believe, or 11.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty good, pretty impressive, especially like considering the heat and everything.
Yeah, and the Swiss athletics team, the track and field team, the women's, were also really good. In the sprinting, they were in the final. In the 100 meter, 2 Swiss women were in the final 100 meter race, which is amazing. I mean, that's, even the States has trouble putting 2 people into that event, and Switzerland put 2 in. And then their 4x100 was also in the final. I mean, I was really impressed with Switzerland this year, I will have to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Well, today we're going to talk about wealth management and what that means, kind of just cover quickly kind of the definitions, the organization, the structure, what that kind of looks like, as well as how do we talk about our family about that. I mean, generational wealth, it is implied that there's multiple generations. So maybe I
can give a brief overview about what these terms mean. So general wealth is, or seems to be, a newer term, and the other one we are going to discuss is family governance, which is pretty close to that, and which is very important, not only for bigger families or wealthier families, but also for families that might have, or as soon as you have to inherit something, it is an issue you should have a look at. And generational wealth is a term which relates to one generation hand over wealth to the next generation. In general, that can include bonds, stock portfolios, but also real estate or yachts or whatever you name it. And the other one is family governance, where it is about this: how do you structure all of this? How do you discuss that within your family? So, for example, the communication in general, who is included, who should know what, and what should be at the plan. So having a plan is very important. Having some objective third party involved who can give advice in specific circumstances, situation, because often there is also a family business involved. There are many questions to be answered when it comes to tax situations and when it comes to international diversification, where we as WHVP take a role where people might have a portfolio within Switzerland, which might make things a little bit more complicated when it comes to this whole structure, and to see how you're going forward, or how do you handle it when there is inheritance, but can also give a great benefit to the overall wealth structure.
Yeah, I think it's really important when you talk about handing that wealth to the next generation. There's a lot of complications because it's usually going from a husband and a wife, or just a father or mother, to kids or multiple kids, and so there's that whole added step of figuring it all out, and how do you organize it, or how do you actually build that wealth in a way that it can be passed down. So looking at how you kind of organize multi-generational wealth, I guess I'll kind of jump on that and talk about that a little bit. As you'd mentioned, a lot of these multi-generational wealth plans have businesses involved. And that's usually the source of the income. It can be from a wealthy adult, for someone who worked as a CEO, for example, and acquired a lot of money through his lifetime. He's going to hand that down, and there's complications for that as well. However, what you're wanting to look at is obviously starting with the organization of a will. That's going to be obviously the strong document that kind of outlines what's going to be done with these assets, as you mentioned, yachts or houses or even stocks or bonds, these portfolios that have been built. So a will is a really big point to get right, and who's going to be your successor and who's going to be the beneficiary of your will. Then you have to look at, if you do have a family business, what's your succession plan? Is it going to be taken over by your family? Is it going to be placed in the hands of a CEO? And your family is going to be the board members of it, so they're going to keep a say in the company, the stock, so a succession plan is very good. Now, when you talk about building generational wealth, how do you accumulate wealth to, pass on to the next generation? It's a statistic that's something like 75% of the families that start with huge wealth, by the third generation, it's already all spent or gone. So how do you, build that wealth that's going to be sustainably passed on for the next couple of generations? You come to revenue streams, and how do you create multiple areas of revenue streams that you can, for one generation almost, not look at, but build, and it looks like passive income to you, even though there's active work in building that passive income. But outside that business, that's where you get into, investing in stocks, investing in real estate, buying a home, getting that diversification in your revenue streams. Diversification is a big word in finance overall, but it's also diversifying how you're earning income. And if you can build good diversified revenue streams, even those can be passed on to individual kids and allow them to then further that with their generational plan. Always have to look into tax planning. A lot, I think it was 59 plus $1 trillion in the next 50 years will be handed over in generational wealth as far as inheritance goes down. And if you're not paying attention to your tax planning, between 40 and 50% of that can be taxed, which is huge. And that's a number that's in the US, how much wealth is going to be handed down from private individual to private individual. And obviously governments want to get a hold of that. That's how they earn money. So you have to make sure you're planning it out so that your next generations can best benefit from that. So those different revenue streams that you're going to look at in investing of that is obviously going to be stocks and bonds. Those equities, you can look at annuities as well, can be a way to create an income for you after you pass away, or after you retire, or even pass away, that your kids are going to benefit from. So that's kind of some areas where you can look at creating revenue streams. I mean, there's mutual funds, there's a variety of revenue streams that you can create to build your wealth while you're obviously focused on your business or your main job. That's your primary source of wealth.
Yeah, I think if I can build on that, it's pretty quickly makes a lot of sense to start working with professionals in that field. So I think consulting an estate planner or someone who's specialized in that kind of work can make a lot of sense, because there's really a lot of things to consider, and I think people should be thinking and planning those things sooner rather than later, because it just makes it so much easier for everyone involved if everything has been planned and especially communicated during good times, because the communication part, I think, is the area where a lot of damage or maybe even the most damage can be done, especially when it comes to generational wealth, where the money is handed down from parents to children. And that is something that I think a lot of people are neglecting or not spending enough time on, because most people that we talk to, they are aware that they need an estate planner, they think about what they want to be done, but they don't really have continuous and regular conversation with their children from an early age. And I think that's very important. Of course, there's consideration. There's people who are afraid that their children will feel entitled or that they are not ready yet. And I think those are valid concerns, but just not speaking about it is not gonna solve those concerns. So I think there's different layers of conversations that people should have, and of course there's the very formal conversation where you actually discuss the whole plan with your children, or maybe they even have to sign a document or two, and I think most people are planning to do that at some point. But I think what's very important and what a lot of people neglect is having more frequent, less formal conversations about wealth, and not just about the facts and figures of how and when the money will be passed on, but also sharing the philosophy behind how the money was earned, maybe sharing stories about the values that is behind the money, talking about what about money is important, what is not important, how can it be used, how should it be used. And I think that's really important to involve children in those conversations from a very early age on, maybe even if they're teenagers, just to be sharing with them what does money mean to you, what does it mean to the family, what can it enable you to do, and just making sure that everyone's involved, that everyone receives the right amount of information. And then I think if you have a lot of smaller discussions about it, just on an ongoing basis, wherever it makes sense in the daily business, then it's much easier to build on that and expand the level of information that you provide at a later stage. Maybe a little bit also from like our practical point of view, because a lot of our clients are at the end of retirement or at the end of their career or the beginning of retirement, which is when a lot of people start thinking about passing on the wealth to their children. And here's another important part that I think a lot of people are missing out on is usually if you have a married couple, not both people are going to pass away at the same time. So usually the first person getting money is the surviving spouse. And in most cases, not both spouses do not have the same level of education, financial literacy and knowledge. So I think it is very important that the spouse that usually takes care of the money really involves the other person, the other parent or the husband or the wife, because this is something that you shouldn't be overlooking, that this person for a couple of years will have to take care of the money. So what we usually do from like a wealth management point of view is we make sure to involve both spouses in our discussions. We want to make sure that both spouses feel comfortable with the portfolio management that we do, with the asset allocation that we do. And then from pretty early on, we usually suggest and just offer the option to include adult children as well, just to make it easier for them, that if they are inheriting money, that they know where to get in touch, that they know how and when to reach out to us, that they are familiar with the process, and that they know how everything will be done. It makes it just so much easier, because if someone passes away, that is an extremely stressful time. It is a sad time, and it is a time that a lot of things have to be organized. And I think whatever you can do to make it easier and simpler for the surviving people to get a hold of the wealth, that is helpful. So usually I would say including the people that will inherit the money early on, even if they don't have a say yet, but just having them informed and insight to the loop, that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, I think that's a really big aspect of it too, and you know, in the States, I think one thing that's very prominent, as far as it's a little bit different than Europe due to the laws and just kind of the culture, is, you know, philanthropist giving, or, you know, this charitable giving that is, I mean, it's massive in the States for two reasons. One, there's that social aspect that Americans have, that believe, you know, we should give out of our private, you know, money to help society. And the other is that there's a huge tax incentive in the United States if it's to a charitable organization or a church or a social project, that obviously helps in the building of wealth, and also helping society, and make sure you're giving your money into the things that you as a person find valuable for society, or you see a need that needs to be helped, and so you want to give. And that, you know, I think comes right off the point that you were talking about, Jamie, about talking with your kids, being involved early. You know, there's in the States, you know, there's a 75% more likely chance that the next generation will be giving if their parents were giving. So again, I think that comes to what they're seeing their parents do. And so if the kids are seeing their parents and being involved in already trying to figure out what the succession plan is, you know, how do you talk about these finances with you, but also talking about, hey, this is how we give. And it's also seeing that often the giving shifts from one generation to the next. You know, the parents might be very into giving into, let's say, a horse rescue program, and the kids got interested in, like a Feed the Children type of organization they want to give. So there's going to be that shifting of even charitable donations that I think there needs to be communication with when setting up, you know, your wealth, because depending on how, as a family, you give, if it's just cutting straight checks or creating a foundation that the family or the family business has that directs those charitable gifts. You know, with a foundation, it's pretty easy to kind of switch, you know, a bit easier. But if your parents, for instance, set up an advisory donor fund, which is wonderful for tax purposes, you know, you can place in those assets as far as art or stocks or bonds, as well as cash or even real estate. You know, those are pretty... those you have obviously a say in what charities you'd like to give to, but at the end you're not pulling the trigger on which charity that goes into. So you have to, when Americans especially think about wealth management and how they want to give, think about what's the long-term goal. You know, for instance, an example is the advisor donor funds. These are great funds because you can start paying into them with $5,000 as a minimum, which is, you know, fairly easy. I think the average American that's not a high net wealth individual pays some around almost $3,000 a year in charitable donations. So that's 2 years. You just hold it back 2 years and you put it into this fund, and you can then just put money into this fund continuously, and it can build tax-free wealth to always be given out to charities. So, you know, I could give, you know, 3% of my portfolio of stock into there, and it's going to keep growing as stock, and all capital gains, everything is not taxed from the point that it's given, and you personally get a write-off up to 50% of your aggregated aggregated gross income of that year, which is immediate tax savings. But again, you're not deciding exactly which charity is going to get that. So I think it's important to talk with your kids about what you're interested in giving, why you're interested in giving, about them, and so that even how you give then can be passed on, or that there's understanding that the parents, when they pass their generational wealth, it's going to go somewhere else. And I think it's a big point that talking with your family makes all those steps easier.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents are waiting until their children are like mature enough and until their understanding of finance is good enough. But I think parents make a huge difference in when and how mature their children will be with money. So I think parents should see themselves as mentors and guidance, and help them achieve the level of financial literacy that is needed for them to be good stewards of the family wealth. So fully agree with that.
Yeah, and I think it's also a question which should be considered about responsibility. So whose responsibility is to pull the trigger at the end? Because another concern from the elder people is that there might be a lot of change until they die or until they hand over part of the wealth. So they think maybe it's not worth to waste the time and already speak about our wealth, because it will be totally different in 10 years or in 20 years when we are maybe die soon. So, but I think that's the wrong perspective, in a way that you should make clear, as you said, to your children, so what are your thoughts of acting, of like structuring your money, so that they understand, okay, why do we have that money, how is it structured the way it is, where does the money go, because that's also something which is a huge point when it comes that the third or the second generation doesn't have wealth at the end of their time anymore, so that they do or maybe not understand where are bills that have to be paid with the lifestyle we inherit as well, to some extent.
Yeah, and I've also heard from clients of mine that it was the father then that handed over the money, and that he really involved the daughter. But once he passed away, that the bankers were not taking her seriously at all. And I think their parents can also really help the children to learn to stand up to themselves and really take control and agency over their own money and decisions, so that they're not going to be pushed around by elder professionals. And I think their parents have a lot of responsibility in teaching their children also how to interact and work together with finance professionals who might have quite a big ego, and to help them not be pushed around.
And I think that's a really big point of, even when you're finding, as far as building wealth management, often, if you're really creating substantial wealth in your lifetime, you're probably pretty focused on your career or business, and you're going to need, it would be advisable to look for asset managers or wealth managers or these estate planners, not just because, that's a part of a profession that they do, but having the time to actually look and build these things takes time, takes a network that maybe you don't have. And so for you, being able to take the time in that short term to find a wealth manager that you trust, that you have a good connection with, or asset managers who really take your needs and your interests over theirs, is huge. I mean, hearing that, it almost breaks my heart hearing that bankers don't take their clients seriously, or in the next generation. For me, that's, you've selected the wrong wealth manager, or the wrong asset manager. I think that's a duty that is, if you choose, or when someone chooses a wealth manager, asset manager, that needs to be taken into consideration, and the time needs to be taken to find the right one.
And I think a family should also be seen to some extent, which is not very romantic, as a business itself, where you buy in the expertise you do not have or you wish to have within your organization. And for that, it is really wise to start early and to discuss also the professionals you're working with together with your family, so that if any issues arise, that you still have time to make any changes or adjustments so that the handover of the whole or part of the wealth will be smoother than the other way around.
Yeah. I think it's really good.
Yeah, and I think if you select the right people, it can offer a lot of safety and stability for the handover process, because then you can rely on professionals who your parents trusted, and then you know you're in good hands. So I think I can only emphasize what you guys just said, that it really is worth your while to be careful in considering who you're working for. Maybe also consult your children who they feel comfortable with. Make sure that they meet the people while you're still healthy and can accompany them. So yeah, that's something very important to consider.
Yeah, I think it's good, just to add one more point, that I think it's good to take the time to actually continue the relationship when you do finally decide on a wealth manager, asset planner, whatever, that you take the time, every year, however, take advantage of the services you're being offered, have those conversations with them. It's realistically it's 4 hours to 5 hours a year where that's going to be planned, but I think it goes a long way. One, so that that person, you get a better feeling of them, and you have a closer connection. So bring your kids in, it's going to be less awkward. It's going to be more of, as you mentioned, a family business. Hey, this is the person who works for our family. I think that's a big point, and I think it's really good conversation.
Yes, I think to conclude, maybe 2 or 3 points. I think when talking about generational wealth, it is important that you have a clear vision. So what do you want to achieve, to know who should be included, and to know where your assets are, so that you have the overview and that okay, I have to take these steps or certain steps to reach my vision.
Thanks again for joining us in our conversation this episode. If you would like to learn more about WHVP and what we do, check us out at whvp.ch. Or if you want to find us at any of our social media handles at Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or YouTube, just search WHVP. Have a great rest of your week.